The lawyer cleared his throat for the third time, but Mabel Whitmore could not stop staring at the signature at the bottom of the will. Her uncle's hand had been steady right up until the end, even when signing away Red Mesa Ranch to the niece he had not spoken to in 12 years. The parlor smelled like dust and old paper. Outside the window, Red Ridge stretched hot and sullen under the afternoon sun, every building leaning slightly as if the town itself wanted to leave. The door banged open. Mabel turned, one hand still pressed to the will on the lawyer's desk. A man stood in the doorway, hat shadowing his face, coat dusty from hard riding. He was lean and tall, and when he stepped into the room, the light caught sandy brown hair and a face all angles and exhaustion. The lawyer stood so fast his chair scraped. "Mabel," he said, his voice suddenly thin. "Miss Whitmore. That is Caleb Crow." Mabel knew the name. Everyone west of the Mississippi knew the name. Caleb Crow rode with the Jessup gang until the robbery in Silver Falls went bad. 3 men dead. Crow vanished into the territories. The marshal in Red Ridge had his photograph nailed to the board outside the jail. Crow pulled off his hat. His eyes found Mabel and held. She saw no threat in them, only weariness and something sharper. Desperation, maybe. Or need. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was low and rough, like wind over stone. "I need to speak with you. Alone." The lawyer sputtered. Mabel raised one hand to quiet him. She had spent 3 weeks traveling to Red Ridge, sleeping in stage stops and cheap hotels, wondering what she would find at the ranch her uncle had left her. She had not expected an outlaw to walk through the door before she even signed the deed. But she had not expected much of anything good in a long time, and fear had stopped surprising her years ago. "You have 2 minutes," Mabel said. Crow glanced at the lawyer. The older man gathered his papers with shaking hands and left, closing the door behind him. The latch clicked. Mabel stayed where she was, the desk between them. "Your uncle hired me," Crow said. 6 months ago. He needed help with a water rights dispute. Marshal Teague was pushing him off the northern grazing land. Teague wanted the ranch for himself, or for the cattle syndicate backing him. Your uncle fought. He hired me because I know how to fight back without a badge getting in the way. That does not explain why you are here now, Mabel said. My uncle is dead. The ranch is mine, and you are wanted for murder. Crow took a step closer. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed near his belt, but did not reach for the gun he must have carried. Manslaughter, he said. Not murder. I was not in Silver Falls when the bank was hit. I left the gang 2 months before. I have been trying to prove it for 3 years, and every lawman west of Denver wants me hanged before I get the chance. Why tell me this? Mabel said. Because your uncle believed me, Crow said. He paid me in work in a roof, and he left me a letter. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would finish the cattle drive and get you through your first season. He said you would need help whether you wanted it or not. Mabel felt the words settle like stones in her chest. Her uncle had been a hard man, silent and stubborn. But he had taken her in once, when her parents died, and she had nowhere else to go. She had been 10 years old and afraid of everything. He taught her to ride and to shoot, and to measure a day by work done, not hours passed. She left when she was 17, after a quarrel she could no longer remember clearly. She had written twice. He never answered. And now he was gone, and he had left her a ranch and a promise from a wanted man. "The cattle drive," she said. 300 head, Crow said. "They are already gathered at the north pasture. Your uncle planned to move them to the railhead in Coldwater Springs before the first snow. If you do not sell them this season, you will not have money to hold the ranch through winter. Teague knows that. He is counting on it." "And what do you get out of this?" Mabel said. "Why would you risk staying here when the law wants you hanged?" Crow met her eyes. "Because your uncle gave me a chance when no one else would. And because if I run now, I will be running the rest of my life. I have one season to prove I can finish what I start. After that, maybe someone will listen when I say I am not the man on that wanted poster." Mabel studied him. She had learned to read men in the years since she left the ranch. She had worked in a dress shop in St. Louis, and then in a boarding house in Kansas City. She had turned down 2 marriage proposals from men who smiled too much and looked at her like she was a problem they could solve. She had come west again because she had nothing left to lose, and because her uncle's letter, delivered by a lawyer she did not know, had said she was the only family he had left. Crow did not smile. He did not make promises he could not keep. He looked like a man who had been alone too long and who knew exactly how much trouble he was in. "One season," Mabel said. "You help me finish the drive and hold the ranch through winter. After that, you go where you need to go. But if Marshal Teague finds out you are here, I will not lie for you." Crow nodded once. Understood. Mabel picked up the will and folded it carefully. She could feel the weight of the choice settling over her shoulders. She had inherited a failing ranch, a herd of cattle, and an outlaw with a death sentence hanging over his head. She had no money, no friends in Red Ridge, and no idea if she could survive a single season. But she had survived worse. And she had promised herself, years ago, that she would never be afraid to start over. They rode out to Red Mesa Ranch in silence. Mabel sat beside Crow on the wagon seat, the lawyer's papers wrapped in oilcloth under her feet. The road was rutted and dry, winding between low hills covered in scrub and stone. In the distance, the mesa rose like a broken wall, red rock glowing in the slanting light. The ranch house was smaller than Mabel remembered. It sat in a shallow bowl of land with a creek running along the eastern edge, cottonwoods marking the water's path. The barn leaned slightly, and the corral fence needed mending. But the roof was solid, and the chimney stood straight. Smoke rose from the kitchen, thin and pale. "Someone is here," Mabel said. "Hired hand," Crow said. "Name is Tom Harlan. He has been with your uncle for 2 years. He knows about me." Mabel glanced at him. "And he is all right with that." "He is all right with your uncle's word," Crow said. "That is enough for now." They pulled up in front of the house. The door opened, and a man in his 50s stepped out, gray-bearded and solid. He nodded to Crow, then looked at Mabel. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "your uncle spoke of you. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Mabel said. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from travel. The wind smelled like dust and distant rain. Thunder rumbled low on the horizon. Tom looked at the sky. "Storm coming tonight. We should get the horses in." Crow was already moving, unhitching the team with quick, practiced hands. Mabel picked up her bag and walked toward the house. Inside, the rooms were dim and cool. The furniture was plain and sturdy. A quilt lay folded on the back of the sofa, stitched in a pattern she remembered from childhood. Her uncle's hat still hung on the peg by the door. She set her bag down and walked to the window. Outside, Crow and Tom led the horses toward the barn. Lightning flickered in the distance, pale and silent. The storm was still miles away, but it was coming fast. Mabel unpacked slowly, laying out her few belongings on the narrow bed in the room that had been hers years ago. The ranch felt both familiar and strange, like a place she had dreamed once and then forgotten. She did not know if she could make it work. She did not know if she could trust Caleb Crow, or if keeping him here would destroy everything before she even started. But she had made her choice, and she would see it through. That night, the storm hit with the weight of a fist. Rain hammered the roof and turned the yard to mud. Mabel sat at the kitchen table with Crow and Tom, a single lantern between them. They ate beans and cornbread in silence, the storm loud enough to swallow conversation. After supper, Tom went to check the barn. Mabel poured coffee, strong and bitter. She set a cup in front of Crow and sat across from him. "Tell me about Marshall Teague," she said. Crow wrapped his hands around the cup. "Teague has been in Red Ridge for 5 years. He came in after the last marshal got shot during a saloon fight. Teague cleaned up the town, ran out the gamblers and the rough element. People trusted him. But your uncle figured out Teague was working with the syndicate. The big ranchers want the water rights on the northern range. They have been buying up smaller spreads, squeezing out homesteaders. Your uncle would not sell. And now he is dead," Mabel said. Crow nodded. "The doctor said it was his heart. Maybe it was. But your uncle told me 2 weeks before he died that Teague had made threats. Quiet ones. The kind that do not leave marks." Mabel felt the cold settle deeper. "And you think Teague will come after me?" "I think he will wait until you fail," Crow said. "If you cannot finish the drive, you will lose the ranch. Teague will buy it for half what it is worth. If you do finish the drive, he will find another way. He does not leave loose ends." "Then we finish the drive," Mabel said. "And we do it before Teague finds a way to stop us." Crow studied her across the table. The lamplight caught the lines around his eyes, the hard set of his jaw. "You do not have to do this," he said. "You could sell the ranch now. Walk away. Start over somewhere safe." "I have been starting over my whole life," Mabel said. "I am tired of running." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, exactly, but recognition. He nodded once. "Then we start the drive in 3 days," he said. "We will need supplies and 2 more hands. Tom knows some men who might ride with us if the pay is fair. But we move fast, and we move careful. Teague will be watching." Mabel set down her cup. She felt the fear, sharp and cold, but she felt something else too. A spark of anger, maybe, or stubbornness. She had come too far to let a corrupt marshal and a cattle syndicate take what was hers. 3 days, she said. The rain slowed before dawn, leaving the yard slick and gleaming. Mabel woke early, pulled on her boots, and walked out to the barn. The horses stamped in their stalls, restless after the storm. She found Crow in the tack room, mending a bridle. He looked up as she entered. "Morning." "Morning," Mabel said. She leaned against the doorframe, her shawl pulled tight against the chill. "I want to see the herd today." Crow set down the bridle. "All right. We will ride out after breakfast." They rode north under a low sky, the land still wet and dark from the rain. The herd was gathered in a wide pasture near the creek. 300 head of cattle grazing quietly. Tom and another man Mabel did not recognize worked the edges, keeping the animals settled. Crow reined in beside her. "That is what your uncle built," he said. "Took him 15 years. Mabel watched the cattle move, slow and heavy. She had never run a drive before. She had helped with roundup when she was younger. But that was different. This was survival. "How long to Coldwater Springs?" she said. 10 days if the weather holds," Crow said. 2 weeks if we hit trouble." "What kind of trouble?" He glanced at her. "Rivers. Bandits. Teague." Mabel tightened her grip on the reins. "Then we move fast." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Tom brought in 2 riders, both young and quiet, both willing to work for wages and a cut of the sale. Mabel packed supplies, checked the wagon, and inventoried what they had. It was not enough, but it would have to be. On the 3rd morning, Crow came to the house before dawn. Mabel was already awake, dressed in riding clothes and her uncle's old coat. She met him at the door. "Ready," he said. "Ready," she said. They rode out as the sun broke over the hills. The herd moved slowly at first, reluctant to leave the familiar pasture. But Tom and the hired men kept them moving, and by midday they were on the trail, a long line of cattle stretching north toward Coldwater Springs. Mabel rode near the front, Crow beside her. The land opened up around them, wide and empty. The sky was pale and endless. She felt small and exposed, but she also felt something she had not felt in years. Purpose. That night they made camp beside a dry creek bed. The cattle settled, exhausted from the first day's push. Mabel sat by the fire, her legs aching, her hands raw from the reins. Crow brought her coffee and sat across from her. "You did well today," he said. "I feel like I got dragged behind the wagon," Mabel said. He almost smiled. "That is what the first day feels like." She sipped the coffee, grateful for the heat. The stars were bright overhead, the fire crackling low. The hired men were already asleep, rolled in their blankets near the wagon. Tom checked the herd one last time, and then settled near the edge of the camp. Crow poked at the fire with a stick. "You ever run a drive before?" he said. "No," Mabel said. "But I grew up on this ranch. I know cattle. I know work." "That is not the same thing," Crow said. She looked at him across the flames. "Then teach me." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right." The days blurred together. They pushed the herd north through open country, following old trails and creek beds. The weather held, but the land grew rougher. Mabel learned to read the cattle, to spot the ones that would bolt, to sense when the herd was restless. Crow rode beside her most days, pointing out landmarks, teaching her the rhythms of the drive. She learned other things too. That he woke before dawn and checked the camp twice before he slept. That he never wore his gun where it could be seen, but it was always close. That he spoke little, but listened carefully. And that when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes she could not name. Not pity, not desire, something quieter, like recognition. On the 5th night, they camped near a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. The sunset was blood red, the clouds streaked with gold. Mabel stood at the edge of the camp, watching the light fade. Crow walked up beside her. "You are thinking too hard," he said. "I am thinking about what happens if we do not make it," Mabel said. "We will make it," Crow said. She turned to him. "You sound sure." "I am not sure of much," he said. "But I am sure you will not quit." She studied his face. The light caught the sharp line of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. "Why are you really here?" she said. "You could have left the day my uncle died. You did not owe me anything." Crow looked out at the valley. "Your uncle told me something before he died," he said. "He said a man is not what people call him. He is what he does when no one is watching. I spent 3 years running because I thought if I kept moving, the accusations would not catch up. But they did, and I was still alone. Your uncle gave me a reason to stop running. I owe him that. And I owe you the truth." "What truth?" Mabel said. "That I did not kill those men in Silver Falls," Crow said. "But I rode with men who did. I looked the other way because it was easier than standing up. That makes me guilty of something, even if it is not murder. I am trying to be better than that. This drive is my chance." Mabel felt the words settle in her chest. She had been angry for so long. Angry at her uncle for not answering her letters. Angry at herself for leaving. Angry at the world for being hard and unforgiving. But standing here, with the wind in her face and the sky turning dark, she felt something else. A small, fragile hope. "Then we finish this," she said. "Together." Crow nodded. Together. On the 7th day, they reached the river. It was swollen from spring melt, wide and fast and cold. The cattle balked at the water's edge, milling and snorting. Tom rode up beside Mabel, his face grim. "We will lose some if we push them across now," he said. "Current is too strong." "We do not have time to wait," Mabel said. "If we lose a day here, we will not reach Coldwater Springs before the buyer moves on." Crow rode past them, straight into the water. His horse plunged forward, chest deep, fighting the current. He made it halfway across before the horse stumbled. For a moment, Mabel thought they would both go under. Then Crow hauled the horse's head up and drove forward, reaching the far bank in a surge of spray and muscle. He turned, water streaming from his coat, and waved them forward. Tom swore under his breath. That man is either brave or insane. "Maybe both," Mabel said. They pushed the herd into the river. The water hit them like a wall, cold and brutal. Mabel felt her horse slip, felt the current pull, but she kept moving. Around her, the cattle bellowed and thrashed. One broke away, swept downstream. Tom went after it, rope already swinging. Mabel reached the middle of the river and felt the bottom drop away. Her horse swam, strong and steady, and she clung to the saddle, soaked and shaking. The far bank seemed impossibly far. Then Crow was beside her, his hand on her bridle, steadying her horse. "Keep moving," he shouted over the roar of the water. "Do not stop." She did not stop. She pushed forward, her lungs burning, her hands numb. And then she was on the bank, the horse scrambling up the mud, and she was safe. Behind her, the herd streamed across, slow and chaotic. They lost 2 head to the current, but the rest made it. Tom and the hired men came last, exhausted and dripping. Mabel slid from her horse and stood shaking on the bank. Crow was beside her, soaked and breathing hard. "You all right?" he said. I think so, she said. Her voice shook. He reached out and steadied her, his hand on her shoulder. You did good. She looked up at him, water dripping from his hair, his face pale and fierce. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him, even through the cold. Then, he let go and turned away, already moving to check the herd. That night, they camped on high ground, too tired to do more than eat and sleep. Mabel sat by the fire, wrapped in a dry blanket, her muscles screaming. Crow sat beside her, silent and still. Thank you, she said quietly. For today, he glanced at her. You would have made it without me. Maybe, she said. But I am glad I did not have to. He looked back at the fire. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight he carried. She wanted to ask him more about Silver Falls, about the men he had ridden with, about the years he had spent running. But she did not. Not yet. They reached the halfway point the next morning. The land flattened out, open and dry. In the distance, a line of dust rose against the sky. Riders. Tom pulled up beside Mabel. That is trouble. How many? Mabel said. 4, Crow said. He had his hand near his gun, his eyes fixed on the horizon. And one of them is wearing a badge. Marshal Teague. Mabel felt the cold settle in her chest. She had known this was coming. But knowing did not make it easier. The riders closed the distance quickly. Teague rode in front, a tall man with a gray beard and a hard, lined face. He wore a marshal's star pinned to his vest, polished and bright. The 3 men with him looked like hired guns, rough and watchful. Teague reined in 10 feet from Mabel. He tipped his hat. Miss Whitmore, I heard you were running your uncle's cattle north. Thought I would ride out and make sure everything was legal. Everything is legal, Mabel said. She kept her voice steady. Teague's gaze slid to Crow. That's so. Because I am looking at a wanted man right now. Caleb Crow. Wanted for manslaughter in Silver Falls. There is a $500 reward. Crow did not move. Teague, he said. His voice was flat and cold. Teague smiled. You got a lot of nerve showing your face around here, Crow. I could arrest you right now. Hang you in Red Ridge before sundown. Mabel moved her horse forward, putting herself between Crow and the marshal. Crow works for me, she said. He has done nothing wrong. He is a wanted man, Teague said. That is wrong enough. Then arrest him, Mabel said. But you will have to arrest me too. Because I will swear in any court that he was with me the night of that robbery. And I will swear that you are harassing me to get my land. Teague's smile faded. His eyes went cold. You are making a mistake, Miss Whitmore. Maybe, Mabel said. But it is my mistake to make. Teague stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned his horse. We will see how far your loyalty goes when winter comes and you are starving. Enjoy your drive, Miss Whitmore. It will be your last. He rode off, his men following. Mabel watched until they were out of sight. Then she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Crow rode up beside her. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Mabel said. She looked at him. He is not going to stop. You know that. I know, Crow said. But now he knows you will not break easy. That buys us time. How much time? Mabel said. Enough to finish the drive, Crow said. After that, we figure out the rest. They pushed harder after that. Mabel could feel the weight of Teague's threat hanging over them, heavy and close. But she also felt something else. A fierce, stubborn determination. She had faced down a corrupt marshal. She had crossed a swollen river. She had kept the herd moving through exhaustion and fear. She was not going to quit now. On the 9th night, a storm rolled in fast and brutal. The wind hit like a fist, tearing at the camp, scattering supplies. The cattle panicked, breaking in all directions. Mabel ran for her horse, shouting for Tom and the hired men. Lightning split the sky, white and blinding. Crow was already mounted, riding hard toward the herd. Mabel followed, the rain cold and stinging. The cattle were running, a dark mass of panic and noise. She rode alongside them, trying to turn them, but they would not slow. Then she saw Crow ahead, cutting across the front of the stampede. He was trying to turn the leaders, force them into a circle. It was dangerous. If his horse stumbled, he would be trampled. Mabel pushed her horse harder, closing the distance. She reached the edge of the herd and rode parallel, shouting, waving her hat. Slowly, the cattle began to turn. Crow was on the other side, driving them inward. The herd began to circle, slower, tighter, until finally they stopped, milling and exhausted. Mabel pulled up beside Crow, gasping for breath. The rain poured down, cold and relentless. He looked at her, his face pale in the lightning. "You all right?" he said. "I am alive," she said. He reached out and caught her hand, just for a moment. His grip was strong and steady. Then he let go and turned to help Tom and the others gather the scattered cattle. By dawn, the storm had passed. They counted the herd and found they had lost 20 head, scattered into the hills. Tom and one of the hired men rode out to search. Mabel walked through the camp, checking the damage. The wagon had tipped, spilling half their supplies. The tent was torn. One of the horses had a gash on its leg. Crow found her sitting on the wagon tongue, her head in her hands. He sat beside her, silent. "We are not going to make it," Mabel said quietly. "Yes, we are," Crow said. She looked at him. "How can you be sure?" "Because you are still here," he said. "And so am I." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that stubbornness and hard work were enough. But she was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of running. Tired of being alone. Crow reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm. She looked down at their joined hands, and something inside her chest cracked open. "I do not know if I can do this," she said. "You already are," he said. She met his eyes. In the pale morning light, she saw the man behind the wanted poster. The man who had ridden through a river to keep them safe. The man who had turned a stampede with his bare hands. The man who had chosen to stay when running would have been easier. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not pull away. They sat like that, quiet and still, while the sun rose over the wet, broken land. They reached Coldwater Springs on the 11th day. The town was small and dusty, a railroad stop with a stockyard and a few scattered buildings. The buyer was waiting, a sharp-eyed man named Garrett, who counted the herd twice before offering a price. It was less than Mabel had hoped for. But it was enough. Enough to pay the hired men. Enough to buy supplies for winter. enough to hold the ranch for one more season. She signed the papers and took the money, folding it carefully into her coat. Crow stood beside her, silent and watchful. When the sale was done, Garrett tipped his hat and walked away. Mabel turned to Crow. "We did it." "We did," he said. She wanted to smile. She wanted to feel relief. But all she felt was the weight of what came next. Teague would not stop. The syndicate would not stop. And Crow was still a wanted man. "What now?" she said. "Now we go home," Crow said. "And we hold what we built." They rode back to Red Mesa Ranch with Tom and the hired men, the money safe in Mabel's saddlebag. The journey was quieter, slower. The land felt different now. Familiar, like it belonged to her. When they reached the ranch, Mabel stood in the yard and looked at the house. It was still small, still leaning, but it was hers, and she had earned it. That night, she sat on the porch with Crow. The stars were bright overhead, the air cool and clear. Tom and the hired men had gone to town for the night. It was just the two of them. "What will you do now?" Mabel said. Crow leaned against the porch rail. "I do not know. I thought I would leave once the drive was done, but I am not sure I want to anymore." She looked at him. "Why not?" "Because I found something here," he said. "Something I did not know I was looking for." "What is that?" Mabel said. He turned to her. "A reason to stay." Mabel felt her heart quicken. She had been alone for so long. She had told herself she did not need anyone. But sitting here, with the night wind soft and the stars endless, she knew that was a lie. "I want you to stay," she said quietly. Crow crossed the porch and sat beside her. His shoulder brushed hers. "Even if Teague comes back, even if the law finds me, even then," Mabel said. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Then I will stay." 2 weeks later, Marshal Teague rode back to the ranch with 6 men. Mabel saw them coming from the porch. She called for Crow, and he came running, rifle in hand. Teague dismounted in the yard. He did not smile this time. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I have a warrant for Caleb Crow's arrest. You will hand him over, or I will take him by force." Mabel stepped off the porch. She had the deed to the ranch in her pocket, signed and legal. She had the money from the cattle sale in the bank. She had nothing left to lose. "You do not have jurisdiction here," she said. "This is private land." "I have jurisdiction everywhere," Teague said. "And I am done playing games." Crow is a wanted man. You are harboring a fugitive. He is innocent, Mabel said. "And you know it." Teague laughed. "That is not for you to decide." "Then let a court decide," Mabel said. "Take him to trial. Let a jury hear the evidence." Teague's face went hard. "There will be no trial. There will be a rope and a tree. That is all men like Crow deserve." Mabel felt the anger surge, hot and fierce. She stepped forward. "You want this ranch. You have wanted it from the start. My uncle would not sell, so you squeezed him until he broke. You thought I would be easier. But I am not. And if you take Crow, I will fight you in every court from here to Denver. I will make sure everyone knows what you are." Teague stared at her. Then he drew his gun. Crow moved fast. He stepped in front of Mabel, rifle raised. Behind him, Tom and the hired men came out of the barn, armed and ready. "You want to fight, Teague," Crow said. "You will get one. But it will cost you." Teague looked around. His men shifted, uneasy. They were hired guns, not lawmen. They had not signed on for a war. "This is not over," Teague said. He holstered his gun and mounted his horse. "But when I come back, I will bring the territorial marshal. And then there will be nowhere left to run." He rode off, his men following. Mabel watched until they were out of sight. Then she turned to Crow. He was pale, his jaw tight. "We need to go to the territorial marshal ourselves," Mabel said. "We need to tell them the truth before Teague gets there." Crow shook his head. "They will not believe me. I am a wanted man. Teague is a marshal. Then we find proof," Mabel said. "We find the men who were really in Silver Falls. We find someone who will testify." Crow looked at her. "That could take months. Years. Then we take months," Mabel said. "I am not letting them hang you." They rode to the territorial office in Carson City 3 days later. It took 2 days of hard riding, but Mabel would not be talked out of it. Crow rode beside her, silent and wary. The territorial marshal was an older man named Bishop, gray-haired and sharp-eyed. He listened to their story without interrupting. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You are asking me to believe that Marshal Teague is corrupt," he said. "That is a serious accusation." "I am not asking you to believe anything," Mabel said. "I am asking you to investigate." Bishop looked at Crow. "And you claim you were not in Silver Falls during the robbery." "I was in Montana," Crow said. "I left the gang 2 months before. I can give you names. Places." Bishop tapped his fingers on the desk. "I will look into it. But until I have proof, the warrant stands. If Teague finds you, he has the legal right to arrest you. Then we will stay out of his way," Mabel said. Bishop nodded slowly. "Be careful, Miss Whitmore. Men like Teague do not give up easy." They rode back to Red Mesa Ranch with no answers and no promises. But Mabel felt something shift inside her. She had fought back. She had stood up. And she was not alone. Winter came fast and hard. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the ranch in white. Mabel and Crow worked side by side, mending fences, stacking firewood, preparing for the long months ahead. Tom stayed on, loyal and steady. The hired men drifted off to find winter work, but they promised to come back in the spring. One night, Mabel sat by the fire with Crow. The house was warm and quiet. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, it was safe. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she said. "Just riding away and starting over somewhere no one knows your name." "Every day," Crow said. "But then I look at this place, at you, and I do not want to leave anymore." She looked at him across the firelight. "I am glad you stayed." He reached out and took her hand. "So am I." She leaned forward, and he met her halfway. The kiss was slow and careful, like they were both afraid it might break. When they pulled apart, she saw the fear in his eyes, and the hope. "I do not know what happens next," he said. "I do not know if we will win." "We already did," Mabel said. "We finished the drive. We held the ranch. We did not quit." He smiled, small and real. "Then, we keep going." In January, Word came from Carson City. Marshal Bishop had found a witness, a man who had been in Montana the same time as Crow. The man swore Crow had been nowhere near Silver Falls during the robbery. Bishop was reopening the case. It was not a pardon, but it was a start. Mabel read the letter twice, her hands shaking. Crow stood beside her, his face unreadable. "This could take months," he said. "Maybe longer." "I know," Mabel said. "But it is a chance." He looked at her. "You would wait that long, not knowing if it will work out." "I have waited my whole life for something real," Mabel said. "I can wait a little longer." He pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. She felt his heartbeat, fast and uneven. She felt the weight of hope, fragile and fierce. In March, Marshal Teague was arrested. Bishop had found evidence linking him to the syndicate, bribes and threats and falsified reports. The territorial governor ordered a full investigation. Teague was stripped of his badge and jailed in Carson City. The news reached Red Mesa Ranch on a bright, cold morning. Mabel stood in the yard, the letter in her hands, and she felt something inside her break open. Relief. Joy. A wild, fierce triumph. Crow came out of the barn, and she ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her, lifting her off the ground. They stood like that, holding each other in the bright spring light, and for the first time in years, Mabel felt safe. In May, Bishop sent another letter. The charges against Crow were officially dropped. He was a free man. Mabel stood on the porch, watching Crow read the letter. His hands shook. His face went pale, then red, then blank. He looked up at her, and she saw the tears in his eyes. "It is over," he said. "Yes," she said. He crossed the porch and pulled her into his arms. She felt him shake, felt him break, felt him hold on like she was the only thing keeping him standing. And she held him back, fierce and steady, because she was. They were married in June, in the small church in Red Ridge. Tom stood as witness. A handful of neighbors came, people who had known Mabel's uncle, people who had watched her fight for the ranch and win. The preacher was old and kind, and he spoke about second chances and hard-won grace. Mabel wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers. Crow wore his best shirt, clean and pressed. When the preacher said the words, Crow took her hand and said, "I do," his voice steady and sure. And when Mabel said, "I do," she meant it with every part of her. They walked out of the church into the bright summer sun. The town spread out around them, dusty and weathered and alive. Red Mesa Ranch waited in the distance, red rock glowing against the sky. That night, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, the same porch where they had sat so many nights before. The stars were bright overhead. The air smelled like sage and summer rain. "I used to think I would never have this," Crow said. "A home. Someone to share it with." Mabel leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think the same thing." He kissed the top of her head. "We built this together." "Yes," she said. "We did." They sat in silence, listening to the night sounds. The wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl, the slow, steady rhythm of a life they had fought for and earned. "What do we do now?" Crow said. Mabel smiled. "We keep going. We fix the barn. We buy more cattle. We plant a garden. We build a life. Crow tightened his arm around her. Sounds good to me. The years that followed were not easy. They faced droughts and hard winters. They lost cattle to illness and had to rebuild after storms. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Mabel learned to run the ranch with a steady hand. She hired good men, treated them fairly, and built a reputation for honest dealing. The ranch grew, slowly but surely, until Red Mesa became known across the territory as a place that kept its word. Crow worked beside her every day, mending fences and breaking horses, and teaching the young hands how to handle cattle. He never wore a gun unless he had to. He never looked over his shoulder. He had stopped running, and he had found something better. A home, a partner, a future. On their 5th anniversary, they stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the mesa red and gold. Below them, the ranch spread out, neat and thriving. Cattle grazed in the pastures. Smoke rose from the chimney. "We did it," Mabel said. Crow took her hand. "We did." She looked at him, this man who had been a stranger once, who had walked into her life with a death sentence hanging over his head. She thought about the river crossing and the stampede and the long nights when they had not known if they would survive. She thought about the moment he had chosen to stay and the moment she had chosen to let him. "I am glad you came back," she said. "So am I," Crow said. He kissed her, slow and sure, and they stood together on the ridge as the sun went down and the stars came out. Below them, the ranch glowed in the twilight, solid and real. A life built from hard work and stubborn hope. A home earned one day at a time. And they lived. They worked and they laughed and they fought. And they held each other through the hard times. They built something that lasted. Not because it was easy, but because they chose it. Every single day, they chose each other. And that was enough.